When it comes to Italian cinema, films by the likes of Fellini and Pasolini are usually ones that are the most conscious in the mind of casual film fans. Those that like horror films might be more familiar with the works of Dario Argento and Lucio Fulci, but I would argue that one of the greatest cinematic auteurs of the 1960s, an Italian director by the name of Mario Bava, is often criminally overlooked. You might not have seen all of his films, or even some of his films, but he counts lots of Hollywood celebrities and famous directors as major fans of his. The likes of Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino have all paid homage to him in their work. So in my view, that's more than warrants some investigation from us today. This isn't meant to be the ultimate top 5 Mario Bava films. I'm not going to lie, I've not seen them all. Particularly looking forward to the UK release of Blood and Black Lace by Arrow Video. But this is meant to be a bit of a guide for you to make your own explorations into his back catalogue, for me to talk about some of my favourites, maybe mention some others as well. First film I've chosen is 1960s Black Sunday, also known as The Mask of Satan, like it says on this copy here. Now, Bava got his big break working with the director Riccardo Freda, who often had an ill temperament and would walk off projects, and Bava would end up finishing them. The first film that Bava had full directorial control over was Black Sunday, and it features a fantastic cast. You get the excellent Barbara Steele. One of the scariest things I ever saw in my life was the end of The Pit and the Pendulum, and I won't spoil it for you, but it was incredible, her performance in that movie. She's not in it for too long. John Richardson also appears in the film, who's pretty good. He was actually considered for the role of James Bond for quite some time in the late 1960s, before Roger Moore would later get the role. It's a black and white movie. Bava's often associated with his excellent colour cinematography, but it's a really atmospheric film. Some of the atmosphere reminds me a bit of Jacques Tournier's Night of the Demon, which is a fantastic British film. Performances are good, and it's almost as if it's like a Hammer horror movie distilled into this inky black and white feeling. There's some like slow motion cinematography which is incredible. The craft in this movie is impeccable, and it's made even better by some of the excellent performances. Barbara Steele gives a standout performance in the movie. For a while she'd actually been in Hollywood, and they tried to turn her into a kind of blonde bombshell kind of glamour girl, and for a while she kind of went along with that, but she didn't like it very much. She actually walked off the set of an Elvis movie she was working on when they had a bit of an argument about a costume, and she went back to Italy to work on films there. She did return to America after a while, but working usually for more independent studios like where Roger Corman worked, American International Pictures, and ended up appearing in some of the movies under Roger Corman's own company, New World, a bit later on. She's fantastic in this movie, and it's well worth checking out. It's a bit of a neglected classic. Next I've chosen Black Sabbath from 1963. Yes, that is the film where the band got their name from. This is a really interesting portmanteau film with a few different stories in it. My personal favourite is one that features Boris Karloff, the horror icon, which has starred as Frankenstein's monster in the classic Universal horror Frankenstein. And I think this is a really stylised movie. There are several different versions of some of Bava's movies. When they're released in America, they were often re-edited by AIP, American International Pictures, that released them. They'd often be rescored by, I think it was Les Baxter, and they sometimes have a narration by somebody like Vincent Price or Boris Karloff added to them to try and make them more commercial. Usually the rescoring was quite awful. In this movie they changed the plot completely. They removed the lesbian subtext of the first story and mess it around a little. At the end of this movie is fantastic, and horror movie fans will love it. This is a really interesting portmanteau. My next choice is A Bay of Blood. This is Mario Bava's attempt at making a slasher movie. It's also known as Twitch of the Death Nerve and comes under several other titles. Now, you may have heard this plot synopsis before. A group of teenagers go to a lakeside camp and are terrorised by a mysterious murderer. Well, it might sound like the early 80s American slasher classic Friday the 13th, directed by Sean S. Cunningham. Now, the big rumour is, and I'm not sure if this is 100% true, that Sean S. Cunningham had actually seen this movie on a double bill with one of his earlier films that he'd worked on with Wes Craven called Last House on the Left, and this is where he predominantly got the plot from. In my opinion, it's not one of Bava's best, but it's a really interesting film. It's got some interesting kills. Music's quite good. There's a really good psychedelic trailer on YouTube, which is also worth checking out. My next choice is the underrated Hatchet for the Honeymoon, directed in 1970, starring Stephen Forsyth as someone who described himself as a homicidal paranoiac. Now, this movie is kind of like a 1970s version of American Psycho. It's an excellent use of voiceover, and Mario Bava gets to demonstrate his expertise at painting wonderful colour palettes, excellent sets, lighting, etc., and what we'd call mise-en-scène. The film's set around the fashion industry, so it's a perfect opportunity for him to display his skills. Performances are generally quite good, and there's a memorable scene towards the end of the film where the killer goes to a club and he's got a bag. I think it's got the ashes of one of his victims or the severed head of one of his victims in the bag, and it's just sat next to him at the table, and I just find that really bizarre. This one's well worth checking out. It's criminally underrated. It's a bit of a controversial choice. This is Danger Diabolique from 1968, which is based on a comic book. In my opinion, not one of Bava's best films, but I've included this to show the breadth of Bava's work. Bava had a bit of a deal with American International Pictures and actually made a film with Vincent Price, which is called Dr. Goldfoot and the S-Bomb, which is a bit like a kind of 60s Batman kind of movie, as is this film. You got John Philip Law playing Diabolique, who's a famous thief, and some people might dress it up as some sort of fantastic Marxist movie. I wouldn't go quite that far, but there's some fantastic performances, lots of very beautiful women in it, a very psychedelic directing style, and you get the always fantastic British acting legend Terry Thomas turning up there, who appears in some of the Amicus anthologies and a lot of classic British Ealing comedies. This one's worth checking out if you like kind of campy 60s Batman. There are some other notable films to mention. He did a couple of movies with Christopher Lee. One's called Whip and the Body. Those of you that enjoy 50 Shades of Grey might enjoy that one. And he also made a film with Christopher Lee called Hercules in the Haunted World, starring one of the world's strongest men at the time, sort of the Arnold Schwarzenegger of his day, Reg Park. That's a fun movie if you enjoy the kind of Sinbad, Clash of the Titans type movies that used to be on ITV when I was growing up. Another one well worth checking out is The Girl Who Knew Too Much, starring horror legend John Saxon. Very much an underrated movie. It's considered one of the first ever giallos. Now, we're going to do a giallo special where we can go into that in more detail. They were essentially kind of short crime fiction novels, and the movies would often have like gory deaths, and Dario Argento was quite famous for doing them. This one was quite changed a lot in America. There's a character in it that suggests that they've perhaps been smoking a bit of wacky backy, as we call it in the UK, and they cut that out of the American release when she's talking about her confusion over events in one scene. There are a few films that I've not had a chance to check out yet of his, which get really high ratings. Blood and Black Lace is considered to be one of his best. There's also Planet of the Vampires from the mid-60s, which apparently was a big influence on Dan O'Bannon and David Shusett when they were writing the script for the classic film Alien. Also, there's another one like A Bay of Blood, which is called $5 of an August Moon. It's supposed to be another really interesting one, so there's lots of Mario Bava to explore. Thank you for watching this episode of Video Vortex. There are some specials planned on some fantastic directors like Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, the legend that is Sam Peckinpah, and I think we'll even sneak in a bit of the wonderful David Lynch as well. Feel free to give me a message and request any individual films, genres or filmmakers, and I'll see if I can get around to exploring them. Again, thank you very much for watching. Good day.